Hello, what you're about to listen to is the recording of the third lore debate. As I'll say in the recording, the second lore debate has also been recorded, but I've got some audio issues which are currently being resolved, hence why the third lore debate is being posted earlier than the second lore debate. This is more or less a podcasting format, and I think that for most viewers it will be best to just put the debate on in the background, like a bit of a podcast. I think it was a very interesting debate, as both me and Mr. Oblivion Wolf, who I'm debating in the video, we were very convinced of our sides, and I think that it resulted in some very interesting conversations. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it. His channel is in the description of this video and is in the top comment of this video, and I very much recommend checking it out. So yeah, enjoy the debate. The visuals are nothing special, they're just some screenshots of like two people debating, so feel free to put it on in the background. Have fun listening. Hello everyone and welcome to the third lore debate. Welcome to everybody who's watching on YouTube and everybody in the audience right now. Yeah, the second lore debate still hasn't been uploaded because I have some very problematic things with the audio, but then you'll have the third lore debate now to watch. The second one will be posted within a week, hopefully, from this one. Today I'm debating Mr. Oblivion Wolf. He's going to debate me on the subject on who is better, the Imperials or the Stormcloaks. Basically a question that's been around forever, aka since 2011. And yeah, we'll see if it's going to have some, if we're going to have some interesting debating stuff. So, Mr. Oblivion Wolf, would you introduce yourself to the audience and to the people on YouTube?
Yes, I will. So, I'm Oblivion Wolf / Elite Wolf. Same thing, I have a YouTube channel, that's Elite Wolf. I'm Oblivion Wolf here on Discord and basically everywhere else. And, well, I think the Stormcloaks are right in their cause.
Alright. Yeah, I'll put links to Mr. Oblivion Wolf or / Elite Wolf to his channel in the description and in the top comment, so if you want to check him out, I suggest do that. Alright, so today we'll be debating Imperials versus Stormcloaks. In this case, yeah, I'll be, of course, the Imperial proponent, and Mr. Elite Wolf or Oblivion Wolf is going to be in favor of the Stormcloaks, and I'd say, Mr. Oblivion Wolf, make your case.
Well, first thing I'm going to do is just kind of set aside an argument that I think is just completely wrong. And that is that in the Bear of Markarth book, I hope I said that right, It says that Ulfric tortured innocent people and killed anyone who didn't help him. Now, to start off, the Bear of Markarth book is pure propaganda. The author is an Imperial scholar as well as forsworn sympathizer, and if that isn't enough to disprove that, he truly did kill those innocents, then why doesn't he kill the Imperial Jarls or anyone who supports the Imperials, like, and I know I'm going to butcher this name, Brunwulf Freewinter, and he's in his capital, so if he really did do that, I'm sure he'd take it to more extremes. And that statement even goes against what Galmor says, that the Stormcloaks only accept people, good, honest warriors who actually want to join. Also, just to add on to that, if he did that, then why doesn't anyone in Sidna Mine talk about Ulfric? If he did all those terrible things, then why doesn't they have anything bad to say about Ulfric? They are forsworn.
Alright. Can I respond?
Yeah.
Alright, I was afraid that maybe your microphone had. Well, I do agree with you that the Bear of Markarth is a very much biased book. It's, as you say, it's complete Imperial propaganda in that sense. But the whole thing with the Elder Scrolls is that there's a big point of unreliable narrator, and everybody, like the Markarth incident is a very good example of something where the unreliable narrator really has a big influence, because from all the sources that you get from the Markarth incident, everybody who tells you about it, or in every place that you can read about it, these people, they have biases. They have something to gain from convincing you what the true story was. So while, yeah, I agree completely with you that Ulfric probably didn't murder all those innocent people, it's probably more of a mixed bag where probably not everything is false in that book, but also at the same time, not everything is true. So there's probably some truth and false within that book. Now, also something I had a similar thing in my preparation, which you had, where I wanted to say something up front. I won't say that Ulfric is working with the Thalmor. I know that in the whole Thalmor embassy, you can get the document which basically says that the Thalmor see him as an asset. But that same note that so many people say, well, Ulfric works for the Thalmor, it literally mentions that he's an uncooperative asset, meaning that he doesn't work with them voluntarily. However, that doesn't mean that his actions don't help the Thalmor, and that's something that I do wish to state, that his actions and his rebellion undermines the chances of the human races of Tamriel to survive, and his actions actively weaken the Empire and the human races, as is stated in that same Thalmor note in the embassy, where they literally state that they have benefit from his actions, and that they want his actions against the Empire to continue as long as possible. So in that sense, I'd say that he's not working with the Thalmor, but he's definitely doing something that's good for them, and I'd say that that's not good, and that's already a good reason why Ulfric shouldn't be supported.
Although, one of those, I can't really disagree with it. It is facts. It's in the book. He's sort of an asset to the Thalmor. But what I'd like to go against there is that the Imperial, from that point of view, the Imperials are also helping the Thalmor because all they want is a long, drawn-out war. So, and to think about it in-game wise, if you're the Dragonborn and you join the Stormcloaks, it'd probably be a pretty swift victory, and then also, I mean, in Imperials too. So that side, I don't really agree with that it would be. Yeah, I don't know what else I was going to say.
You were saying about that if you join the side of the Stormcloaks with the Dragonborn, that it's probably going to be a swift victory, and same case with the Imperials. And that's something that I agree with. We debated it in the first lore debate, where we debated a bit on what's the actual strength of the Dragonborn. And basically, in any case, it would be a great asset to whichever side. And of course, within your gameplay, you see that the Dragonborn is the decisive factor. So maybe that helps with getting you back to where you wanted to go.
Yeah. All right. I don't know. I'm just gonna switch topics completely because I didn't write anything down about that. I thought I had it all in my head. I did not. So I also wanted to go to a little smaller topic than like the bigger topics between Imperials and Stormcloaks, and that is people say the Empire rightfully owns Skyrim, and I would like to bring up a quote from Galmor. And when asking him, hasn't Skyrim always been a part of the Empire? He says, not this Empire. The world's better without it. Certainly Skyrim is. I fought in the Imperial army in the war against the Dominion. I bled and spilt blood for the Empire, and for what? The Empire to bend its knee before those evil elf bastards? Signing a treaty meant to kill the heart of the Empire itself. To deny Talos? No. I will have no part of any such Empire, and I will gladly gut anyone who says otherwise. So it's kind of like, I think as players, we always put ourselves in this omnipotent position where we know everything in the world, like of Elder Scrolls. When you really need to put yourself in the boots of, per se, Galmor, where you had just went and fought these elves for an empire for so long. You've killed people, you've seen your family die, well, brothers in arms, I guess. You left your family to go do that, and then before the fight even reaches Skyrim, they give up. The Empire just gives up, and they side the Concordant. I probably butchered that too. To deny the worship of the god that the Nords worship the most. So it's kind of, I don't know, you just kind of have to put yourself in their shoes there. And also, just another reason there, a little smaller reason, is that Talos is the only reason the Empire ruled any place in the first place. And a fact the Empire that likes to forget now. And they turn their backs on him and his people, so they don't deserve to rule his homeland. And I'll cut myself off it.
some truth to what you're saying, but especially with your first argument, where which basically comes down to Gelmar saying something like, "Why would we bleed for an empire that won't bleed for us?" Correct? Something like that. That's basically what it comes down to. You need to turn that argument around a bit, because when you think about it, the Nords aren't the only one who fought in the Great War. Yeah, they came in, the Nordic legions came in at the end to help, true. But it was mostly the Imperial legions and the original Imperial legions that held the line for 5 years, trying to keep the Thalmor out of the Empire, trying to keep Skyrim prosperous and peaceful, because the only reason that the Thalmor never reached Skyrim was because the Empire bled for them all those 4 or 5 years. And Cyrodiil was Southern Cyrodiil was completely destroyed and was occupied, and these people, they bled worse than anyone in Skyrim had done. So it's very logical that the Empire would sign the Concordat in order to get Southern Cyrodiil back and to get the peace, to get peace down so that they could rebuild. And yeah, of course, I mean, I get that Gelmar is upset. I mean, to him it feels like, hey, we're coming in there with the legion from the Nords, and we completely butchered their armies at the Red Ring. So why won't we fight on? Well, there's ample reason to take that the Imperial armies, it wasn't all too sure that they would have been able to retake all the cities in Southern Cyrodiil with all the Altmerry garrisons that were still in place. So I don't think the peace was all that irrational. I mean, of course it might have seemed that way for people from Skyrim, especially people who are very patriotic like Gelmar. But when you turn the argument around, the people of the Empire, they bled for Skyrim so that the Thalmor wouldn't reach Skyrim. They bled worse than Skyrim has done. The people of Skyrim, they made bigger offers than the people of Skyrim have just to keep the Thalmor out by just fighting them for 5 whole years in the south of Cyrodiil. So I think that's not something that should be forgotten.
Yeah, there's one point I'd like to sort of disagree with, and although it's not super important because it's sort of just speculation, is after the Battle of the Red Ring was the last battle,
yeah.
Correct? I believe that the Empire could have certainly at least tried to gain back a little bit of land to sway the negotiations for the treaty. So at least, like, maybe not ban Talos or something like that. But that is speculation. There's no way we can tell, at least on my part.
Well,
so, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, that's true. That it's complete speculation that we don't know how the negotiations have went. However, we have some very solid grounds to be able to speculate that the Empire actually got a pretty good deal at the end of the Great War. I mean, we heard from Jarl Balgruf in Skyrim that after the Great War, the Empire, which had fought itself almost to death during the war, was able to give all the Jarls of Skyrim chests of gold, which presumably, this is pure speculation on my part, because the only reason that I can think where those chests of gold came from were possible war reparations, which the Altmerry Dominion had to pay as part of the White Gold Concordat, because the Empire was just poor. I mean, they wouldn't be able to give Skyrim chests of gold, especially if Southern Cyrodiil is just completely in ruins and they could use the money for that. So my speculation is that they probably negotiated some war reparations out of it. And when you think about Cyrodiil just being in complete disarray and just being completely destroyed after the war, and Skyrim also having got especially damage in terms of like people they lost who went to fight in Cyrodiil, you'd have to make the whole scale. What's the word in English? You have to do a sort of cost-benefit analysis. Like, yeah, we have to ban a god, but on the other hand, we get money to rebuild, and we'll get our lands back, and that's already a pretty sweet deal. Where it's very likely that banning of Talos, I mean, it was just symbolic to basically give the Altmerry Dominion also an out, where they could just say, where the Altmerry Dominion would be able to say, see, we got something done. Meanwhile, the Empire just got their money and got the land back that they lost. So I think in the end, it might have been a fair trade, but I mean, that's just my opinion in these kind of things, where I think that the money is more important than like the one god that you can no longer worship. But I can imagine some people from Skyrim thinking differently, of course.
Yeah. So before I continue on, I'd like to touch on a small theory. I'm not going to get into it at all. That the Thalmor want to, I think it's like undo reality or something like that, and banning Talos is one of the parts of their plan. So if at that point the Imperials basically just screwed all of Nern, if that is true, that is just a theory. That's nothing at all. Uh, so that could just be completely wrong. But I'd like to go on and go against another argument that I think is just, I just think there's really just nothing to it, is the argument that the Stormcloaks are racist. Now, as far as I'm concerned, there are two people, I believe, in Windhelm that are racist. And that is Rolf, and then whatever the other guy is, I don't remember his name. I never talked to him. In fact, the only reason I talked to Rolf was so
I can also can't think of him.
Yeah. He's not really important in anything as far as I'm concerned, except for being a racist Nord and talking to that one dark elf lady. But if that isn't enough, and you may say that all the other Stormcloaks are racist too, then when asking Galmor, do you oppose anyone who's not a Nord? He says, I oppose tyranny. I oppose those who tell me how to live, what to think, and what to believe. I'm a man. Skyrim is man's homeland. That's a fact I'm proud of. There's no shame in that. And plus, just to kind of add on to that, if your player character could be even a high elf, the most hated hated race in all of Skyrim, they'll still accept you. They just want to know why a high elf would want to fight for Skyrim. And then there's also the argument that people think Ulfric forced the Dark Elves to live in the Grey Quarters, and that's just not true, as there's the live-in nanny for the Cruel Seas, the owner of the Halul farm, and you might ask, well, why doesn't Ulfric fix the Grey Quarters? Well, it's a simple reason there. He's in the middle of a war. All his efforts are going to the war against the Empire, which is, if he wins it, not an easy war to win. So he's got to have all his resources there, not fixing a part of a community in his capital that doesn't even help him in his war effort. And next, it's the Argonians. That it's not, and as far as this goes, it never said that they aren't strictly forbidden from entering the city. It's just they can't live in there, and it's just never said that they can't go in there. Plus, do you know of any space that is available for the Argonians to live in Windhelm? There's not enough room. Another reason could be that a good half of the city is Dark Elves, and if you know the hostility between the Argonians and Dark Elves, it isn't smart to have them close to each other whatsoever. That would be a lot more trouble in the streets. And it's just not smart to have them close to each other. So it's as simple as Argonians need to live by water, and in fact love to, while Dark Elves don't. So put the Argonians by the water, and the Dark Elves can live in the city. And then people talk about the Khajiit caravans a little bit. They're not allowed in any city, Imperial or Stormcloaks. So that's just kind of, yeah.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, and I agree to an extent. Like, I think that most of the arguments about Ulfric being this racist dictator, I mean, those things are exaggerated. You can always say, like, yeah, he didn't do much against the practices. But then there's, of course, also the argument, yes, in the middle of a war, but then there's also people who would say, yeah, but it was already going on before the Civil War. And I mean, that's basically a yes-no thing, where I think that the answer lies probably somewhere in the middle. But what I really wanted to talk about is the fact what you said in the beginning, with where Gelmar basically said, I just want to fight for being free and not being told what to believe in. And not to be ruled over by tyranny. And that's the whole irony of the situation, where basically the Empire tried to fight for the same thing, and they just got completely destroyed, and then managed to thwart it at the last possible moment, and then get a favorable treaty out of it to maybe fight another day. And basically everyone in the Imperial Legion, like, there's nobody who says, yeah, the Thalmor are such great guys. I mean, even Tullius himself says, yeah, we're going to go to war with the Thalmor again. And I mean, we have every reason to believe that the we have every reason to believe that the Empire will go to war again with the Thalmor at some point. And it's even so that the Empire didn't even enforce the White Gold Concordat strictly to begin with, because from the dialogue with Alvor, which is the blacksmith in Riverwood, we hear that everybody just worshipped Talos for years after the White Gold Concordat. But then Ulfric started to make a big fuss about it, and then suddenly, because he made such a big fuss about it, the Empire was forced to let the Thalmor on their lands to get the Talos worshippers arrested, meaning that the Empire, they basically acknowledged, like, yeah, this is just a symbolic thing, and we're not gonna make a fuss about it if you don't. And then Ulfric just broke the whole symbolic meaning and just forced the Empire's hand in oppressing him. While before, he wasn't even being oppressed before he started the shenanigans. So, that's the whole irony here, where both sides essentially fight for the same thing against the tyranny of the Thalmor, but in this way they just work against each other, if that makes sense. And my English just completely crashed during the last 4 paragraphs, because I don't think my argument made much sense.
I understand what you're saying there, but I don't play a lot of Blades, but I've played a little bit of it, and I swear this is relevant to the conversation.
You don't want to play that game, trust me. I 100% completed it. You don't want to.
If I do play, it's Arena. But and I'm pretty sure, and like I said, I don't play it, but I'm pretty sure that there is Thalmor people patrolling around looking for Talos worshippers. That could be wrong. Like I said, I don't really play the game, but I remember kind of seeing that. Do you know if that's true? I remember you did a Blade stream. Did you see any of that?
The case with the Thalmor in Blades is very curious, as it basically contradicts previously established lore, where in previously established lore it said basically that the Thalmor were only allowed on Imperial territory in Skyrim the moment that Ulfric started his stuff. That's basically what's being said, because why otherwise would the people of Skyrim be able to worship Talos just basically freely, as long as it just didn't make a big deal about it? That was the previously established lore, but then Blades came, and the way I personally always interpreted it to basically work around this, well, I don't know if it's a retcon from Bethesda's area or not, or if it was intentional. The way I always interpreted this is that the Thalmor, after the Great War, they got explicit permission to hunt down the Blades. So I'd always interpret it as like, yeah, maybe they have like a 5-year term to hunt down the Blades, and then they have to get out, and then they were allowed back in at the time of Skyrim. But you're completely true. You're completely right that they are there. But that's something that has at least completely been changed from Skyrim's lore. So I'm trying to fit that in the puzzle, even though it's also very possible that Bethesda just forgot about the lore that they established in Skyrim. I honestly don't know what the exact situation is.
Yeah, it's just a classic Bethesda move at this point.
Yeah.
So you just gotta have to choose what you want. But I think you sort of touched on it there in the argument before the Blades thing, and it's that kind of that the Nords, people say that the Nords don't stand a chance against the Aldmeri Dominion. And just to say, for one, Nords have been fighting elves for eras. I mean, it's literally in their blood to fight elves. So why would the Dominion be any different than the Snow Elves? And speaking of the Snow Elves, I'm gonna mess this up. It's Ysgramor. He only had 500 people, and if you want to think about it again with the companions, the Uthrad is completely rebuilt in Skyrim, because I'm pretty sure that even if you don't do the quest line, somebody else does. So, I mean, a Stormcloak sympathizer or just Stormcloak in general could get their hands on the Uthrad, and then, I mean, repeat history. But and then you could say, well, if the whole Empire couldn't beat the Dominion, how could Skyrim? And although the Empire was weakened, and the Dominion was also very wounded. Their main general and every soldier in Cyrodiil was killed. That was one of the largest armies ever assembled in Elven history. And since elves reproduce a lot slower than humans do, they would have a hard time recouping those casualties. Plus, Hammerfell alone was able to beat them, and they were just as hurt as Cyrodiil from the Great War. They also had a civil war between the Crowns and Forebears before that. And if you want to continue pushing that argument, the Skyrim could also form an alliance with Hammerfell, Plus, they offered High Rock an alliance. They didn't instantly reject it, so they could be thinking about it. These nations would put a hell of a fight against the Dominion. Plus, Nords, and you may say that Red Guards, the only reason they were able to get away from Thalmor is because they're the greatest warriors in all of Tamriel. Well, Nords are definitely in the running for the best warriors because, one, the Red Guards have failed to win any war against the Nords, and the Nords were able to invade a part of Hammerfell and split in half until a treaty was agreed. The Red Guards are great warriors, you can't take that from them, but they specialize in hit and run tactics. That's why they're scouts and skirmishers in the Empire. And the Nords are known for battle tactic, strategy, and formations. Many of the Empire's formation, shield walls, and tactics were based on Nord fighting styles. And then, once again, just think about it. Yskamor only had 500 people, and that group nearly wiped out an entire race of elves. And also, despite popular belief, not all of the Stormcloaks are just a bunch of farmers with pitchforks. A good majority of them are Legion veterans who have become frustrated with how things within the Empire have progressed. In my case there.
Alright, I'm going to start with your argument which relies on Ysgramor, which the Snow Elves and the Altmerry Dominion are two very different cases, and especially considering that Ysgramor didn't only have the 500, because he used the 500 to erect a revenge for Saarthal upon the people who were living in Saarthal then, which were Snow Elves, which retook it. After which he got a lot more reinforcements, and there were a lot of Nordic armies coming from Edmora, which they used to take down the whole Snow Elf civilization. So it was not just the 500, although the 500 did play an important role in it. So yeah, I'd say that. But the main thing that I wanted to say in this is regarding Hammerfell and High Rock, because in a situation where Skyrim would become independent, like, yeah, it's among the possibilities, but I'd say that it's not very likely, because Gelmar says that High Rock has always been happy under Imperial rule, and I believe he says something like eating Imperial gold or something like that. I don't remember the exact quote. But you have to know that Hammerfell and High Rock, they would probably rather ally themselves with Cyrodiil than with Skyrim, and Cyrodiil, they would probably cut diplomatic relations with Skyrim almost immedately after the moment Ulfric becomes independent, and would either try to invade it again, or maybe if Ulfric has puts on an smiley face or something like that, I don't know, he might be able to ally himself with the Empire. Because what's interesting is that we know that Ulfric himself knows that his armies aren't very strong, because during the Dark Brotherhood questline, in the final quest where you have to defeat the Emperor, where you have to assassinate the Emperor, if you have the Civil War running at the same time, there's a unique dialogue where Ulfric says, okay, we can't attack Solitude right now, the Emperor is there. If we kill him, all of Cyrodiil will be coming to Skyrim, we don't win that. So he knows that his army isn't actually fit to fight a real army. And Hammerfell and High Rock, they would probably know that. In addition to that, High Rock is just part of the Empire and is very friendly to Cyrodiil, so they wouldn't just ally themselves with Skyrim out of friendliness or something like that. Hammerfell is a bit more complicated, but we have ample reason to believe that Hammerfell is probably also besties with the Empire, as the Empire actually we know that in Hammerfell there's what's called the House of Quills, which is a sort of, library apparently, where they keep anti-Thalmor propaganda things which are outlawed in the Empire and try to spread it into the Empire. Meaning that they at least have some form of, at least they have a willingness to sort of help the Empire against the Thalmor. In the meantime, we also know that Hammerfell nobility, which had to flee during the Great War, when their cities were occupied, like Dinahan al-Rihad, which is a prince of Hammerfell, they went to the Empire in exile and actually still worked with the Emperor at the time of Blades, meaning that just before their return to their kingdom after their kingdom got liberated, meaning that at least some of the nobility in Hammerfell is still very favorable to the Empire. meaning that probably Hammerfell is also more likely to help the Empire than an independent Skyrim in this case.
Yeah, there's something I'd like to touch on at like towards the end of there. So the Redguard legions of the Empire, quote unquote, deserted the Empire, to put it in technical terms, so that it's not directly like the Empire aiding Hammerfell. I think the same thing would happen with Nord legions, especially since a lot of the Nords are just naturally like nationalistic, I'd say. I don't know a better word would be for that.
Patriotic.
Yeah, patriotic. So they'd definitely go back home if the Stormcloaks won and help fight off the Thalmor, considering all things. And then I'd like to also put up the argument that Ulfric and his Stormcloaks really are the only ones who care about Skyrim. So for one, like in a like not like the Empire's way of caring for Skyrim, like it gives them support for their empire, like money and gold and stuff like that. But they actually care for Skyrim and her people. For example, the Empire just let the Forsworn have their way with the Reach, and the Forsworn killed civilians that would cross them, not even like just get in range of their quote-unquote kingdom. Of course, that was until Ulfric's militia went and took the Forsworn down. And then also, just to bring up a couple of quotes from the Stormcloak side of the Civil War. When giving Ulfric the Jagged Crown and saying, "We lost a lot of good men, I hope it was worth it," Ulfric says, "The blood of our fallen heroes will make Skyrim free." So it's just honoring the people who have fought to even just get the Jagged Crown. Then also Ulfric wants Falkreath all the time, even in negotiations he wants Falkreath. And he says, because it holds the souls of the bravest warriors there, proving he cares about the Nords living or dead, and wouldn't want that disrupted with Imperials. And then when talking with Galmor about sending troops to march on Whiterun, I forget what Galmor says, but I believe Ulfric states, "Is a man ever ready to send the order that will mean the death of good men?" So just, he cares about his army, he cares about Skyrim, and I'd say a lot more than the Imperials do.
I'll go through it point by point. First, there was the point about Hammerfell and that the Imperial deserters, which I agree on that it was deserters, although the general from the Imperial side allowed them to desert. That indeed, because of the Hammerfell Patriots essentially, who wanted to desert, that's why they fought the Dominion to a standstill. Important, it's a standstill. In the exact wording in the game, everywhere it says standstill and not that Hammerfell was victorious over the Altmerry Dominion. It's something that I personally I've also misinterpreted many times in the early years of my channel, where I read victory, but the exact word said standstill, meaning that it could be that they managed to fight the Dominion to the beaches and basically just fought, and that where they fought them to a standstill at the beaches. But it's also very possible that for 5 long years the front just stayed in the exact place where it was, just like a sort of trench war, where the Dominion was no longer able to advance because the Redguards were holding it, but that the Redguards also didn't have enough power by themselves to attack the Dominion. So we don't know the exact situation there, which is the whole foundation problem that I talked about a while ago, where we don't know the exact information, hence we don't have the exact grounds on which we can speculate. Now, the second argument that you made is that the people, the Stormcloaks, genuinely care about Skyrim while the Empire doesn't. And while I mean, I have to agree with you on the fact that the Emperor probably cares less about Skyrim than, for example, Ulfric. I mean, he rules over several provinces, and, well, if you really wanted to put it in those kind of terms, to him a province is just a number, like Province 2, Province 1. But to say that the Imperials don't care about Skyrim, that's not completely true. I mean, think about Legate Rika. She's very patriotic, but she joins the Imperials because she thinks that only with the Imperials they stand the right chance. And even those who Ulfric calls Imperial milk drinkers, like Jarl Balgruuf, who definitely cares about his hold about Skyrim, they join the Empire in the end. And even Torrig, the king that he calls an Imperial puppet, he respects Skyrim's traditions. And even though he knows that he will lose to Ulfric, I mean, he could just strike Ulfric down or have his soldiers remove him. He respects Skyrim's traditions because he cares about Skyrim, even though he's, as people have called him, an Imperial puppet, and he is with the Imperials. And the final thing that you made, where Ulfric says a lot of patriotic things, that just one little thing that I want to add to that is that there's a difference between rhetoric and actions. I mean, of course, Ulfric undertakes a lot of patriotic action, but you need to keep into mind that there's something called rhetoric, which people will just say things to win people for their argument. I mean, we see it in real life all the time. I'm not about to get political in this debate, don't worry. But I mean, in real life, you often see like dictators saying that they're very patriotic and want the best for their people, while their actions really say to the contrary. And while I wouldn't say that Ulfric's actions especially speak to the contrary on the most part, you need to remember that he's also in a war, and he needs to win people for him. So he might say, yeah, we need to win Falkreath for the fallen dead. He says that, true. But when you think about it, Falkreath is way more important to him as a strategic point where he can disrupt the Imperial supply lines. As you said, during war, you can't really focus on social issues and that kind of thing. Just like with the Dunmer in the Grey Quarter and the Argonians, he has to divide his attention to the war. And I personally think that stuff like Falkreath is much more important for the war than it is for those graves. I personally think that if Falkreath was on the other side of Skyrim, and for example, like those graves were on the other side of Skyrim, he'd still want it because as badly because of the Imperial supply lines problem.
Yeah. I would just like to point out two things. I think this will probably be the only time I'd say something bad about the Stormcloaks, although I mean, Bethesda made it purposely to be like, okay, well, you can choose either or. Both have pros and cons. But I'd like to say two very big things that upsetted me with the Stormcloaks was one, High King Torrig would have went along with Ulfric. He would have been very willing to go along with him. He respected Ulfric and his traditions, but Ulfric still, and it's still kind of like he had to make a stance. If the High King couldn't protect himself, then they couldn't be able to protect it from invaders. And then the second, which is probably my biggest problem because there was really no point in it, was taking Balgruuf off the throne. He didn't really care Imperial or Stormcloak, although he does go with the Imperials. He really just cares about Whiterun, so I think he probably could have kept Balgruuf on the throne of Whiterun, but it was whatever. And then this one, it's very small. It's just, we're gonna kind of disprove it real quick. Is that people say that in Sovngarde, Ulfric admits his cause is wrong. No, he doesn't. He says he's upset the war started at the time it did because so many soldiers died, so Alduin had more souls to eat, which is kind of what I want to get into, which is like the bigger issue. I believe, or at least this is obviously just speculation. This could be completely wrong. Is that the Empire and Skyrim and all those? There's one main enemy, and that's the Thalmor. So I think that Skyrim and the Empire and all those could set aside their differences for at least one more great war to push back the Thalmor and really just settle in that man is not going anywhere. You know, you elves get back to Somerset. At least some of them. So, I mean, I think it's very possible for an alliance to set in, but that's also just pure speculation. I could be wrong. They could continue battling. You know, the Empire could, after a Stormcloak victory, go back and invade Skyrim instead of going back to fight the Thalmor. There's a bunch of stuff that could happen. It's just speculation. So I just wanted to kind of graze over that topic. Do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, yeah, it's. I'm trying. I'm trying to think what the exact response to this has to be. I'd say, yeah, you're completely right. Like, yeah, they could put aside their differences, make an alliance, that kind of thing. But I mean, you can also turn that around, where the only reason that the Civil War is currently there is because Ulfric really wants his Talos worship now, and he will have it now instead of after they beat the Dominion. While they have much more of a chance to beat the Dominion if they stay together, and all those soldiers on both Imperials and Stormcloaks side didn't die in that pointless civil war, which will ultimately, once the Thalmor are defeated or are victorious, will be proven pointless. Where it's basically just the people were even able to worship Talos in secret, but after Ulfric started his shenanigans, they started the ban started really being enforced, meaning that in the end, I mean, that's an argument you can make for both cases. Where, yeah, of course, after the Civil War, they could just all be happy and friends, but you could also turn it around and say, well, there didn't even need to be a Civil War to begin with if that kind of mentality had already been there from the beginning.
Yeah. Now, to kind of set that aside, I forget who says it, or if it's even said. I could be thinking this up, but I'm pretty sure somebody says, like, it might even be Galmore. He says, like, so, you know, they say we're not allowed to worship Talos. What's next? What we're supposed to eat? What we're supposed to wear? It's sort of like a thing where it starts with Talos, and they keep taking away freedoms, and that's kind of the Stormcloak side of it, where it starts with Talos, and that's the big reason. That's the reason the Civil War started, was the banning of Talos. But then it also goes like, well, if they're gonna ban Talos, which is the most prominent thing in Nord religion, or really in their culture at all, then they'll just keep going down the step, like what you should eat, what you should wear, what weapons you should use, or if you should even have weapons. And it's kind of a thing where you take away one thing, and they're just going to continue taking more and more. And that's just kind of that side of it.
I mean, that's of course the classical slippery slope, where you basically says, okay, today they do this, and then the next day, what's next? Well, why would there be anything next? I mean, the argument that the Thalmor needed to be banned was basically just because of the White Gold Concordat, and likely the banning of Talos, the Imperials just saw as something symbolical to give the Thalmor, to have them not lose face completely, as they had to give Southern Cyril back and had to pay war reparations, likely. I mean, that's my personal speculation, I explained it before. So, I'd not really say... I completely lost my train of thought. Yeah, sorry. What was the original argument again? All right, never mind. Never mind. I remember. Sorry. I mean, that's the classical slippery slope, where the Empire banned Talos, and that was basically the whole issue. And then it just got fired up when Ulfric started his shenanigans, and then the Thalmor swooped in, which became an even bigger problem, because of course the Thalmor are way scarier than the Empire to a lot of people. Which and to the people, it looks like, oh, the Empire is just agreeing with all this. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that they agreed with all it, because before Ulfric started, it wasn't really a problem, and there isn't any indication of the Empire actually wanting to ban anything else. I mean, Skyrim was pretty independent under the Empire. Well, not independent, they were autonomous, that's different. They were almost like an autonomous region within the Empire before everything went down. And the Stormcloaks are always like, yeah, we want the freedom back we once had. Well, yeah, you never really lived under that kind of freedom. You lived in autonomy, and you were always happy with that. You could basically do everything that you wanted until Talos got banned. I mean, the Empire wasn't necessarily happy about that, and they aren't necessarily planning to really ban anything else. So I'd say that, yeah, it's a classical slippery slope, and I guess why people are convinced by that kind of, like, why people would fall for it. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it's much to worry about, if that makes sense.
So I'm gonna get on to the biggest part of my argument. Has the most part in my notes. That's why I'm saying that, and that's that Ulfric is just power hungry. So since I have so many, and I don't want to just continue rambling on, I think I'll just like stop halfway, get your thoughts on it, and then continue. So just to kind of set aside that Ulfric is just power hungry, I would like to bring up a part from Galmor. He says, "What is the aim?" When you ask, "What is the aim of the war?" He says, "Well, first we kick the Thalmor and their bloody Imperial puppets out of the country. Then we'll rebuild Skyrim into the land she once was. When done with that, we will take our army to the Dominion and show those pointed-eared bastards not every man is fit to be their slaves." Which is just implying that the Stormcloak cause is to stop the tyranny of the Aldmeri Dominion and push out the Imperial lapdogs who have already bowed to the tyrants out of Skyrim. Another quote from Galmor is, when asked, "What are your reasons for joining the war?" He says, "Reasons? Since when does a man need a reason to protect his family, to defend his homeland? It's the damn outsiders in the Empire needs the reasons." And then I'll get to this one and then get your thoughts on it. And then when asking Ulfric to use his desire to be High King, he says, "There hasn't been a true High King for generations. For far too long, he's been handpicked by the Emperor and given I think I'm going to say this, emphatic nods by milk-drinking jarls addicted to Imperial coin. It's time we had a real king, one of our making." The key word in there, "our." It's not my making. It's our making. Which goes to say the people want him on the throne, and several dialogue options. It shows that the people of Windhelm wanted him on the throne, and I believe in my notes I touched on that later. So, you have anything to say about that?
I'd say that it's an interesting argument, and this is also one of those things where it's basically the other side of the Imperial coin in this kind of sense, because Ulfric says, well, yeah, there's only been apathetic jarls of whatever the argument was, where they were just yes-saying jarls because of Imperial coin. I mean, that's rhetoric, because there were jarls that cared about Skyrim, that were very happy to disagree with the Empire. Think, for example, about Jarl Balgriff. He's been a jarl for way longer, even before the Civil War, and Torrik only got his vote at the Moot. And Balgruuf is not someone who would vote Torrik into office if he was if he wasn't agreed with it, or if he didn't agree with it. I mean, yeah, there are Imperial milk drinker jarls. I mean, we see them enough in the game, but it's also not as black and white, because Ulfric's rhetoric, it's just completely made to convince people for the Stormcloak cause, as is the Imperial side, because just like you said, that Ulfric, people call Ulfric a tyrant, and yeah, of course his rhetoric says no, he isn't, but in the end, I mean, it isn't black and white. I personally don't think he's a complete power-hungry tyrant, but I also think that it's very convenient that he dethroned High King Torrik, and that it's very convenient that he led the war, and therefore that he placed the Jarls in the Imperial capitals, meaning that the people there had no direct say in it. He appointed them, meaning that in the end, half of the Moot will at least be people that he handpicked. So in the end, we will get a High King handpicked by Jarl Ulfric instead of handpicked by the Emperor. So I mean, in the end, it will still not really be our making, because it's just the other side of the coin. In that sense, it's not a democracy. I mean, Skyrim's never been a true democracy. It's been with the nobles, and this is just one side of the nobility replacing the other side of the nobility. And what regards to Galmar, because you bring up his dialogue, I completely agree that Galmar, he fights for his country. He's just happy to do it, and he wants to push the Thalmor and the Imperials out, and he's very patriotic. And I personally very much believe that his motivations for fighting, just like Ulfric's by the way, are patriotic. But he does fall for Ulfric's dialogue, for Ulfric's rhetoric. And while I think that a large part of the rhetoric is probably true, it's still all very convenient, and in the end, a bit hypocritical, as the Jarls that pick him, more than half of them, are just handpicked by him, meaning that we get a High King handpicked by whoever Ulfric wants. I mean, maybe he isn't it himself, but it's all very convenient, just in the same convenient way that he removed the other person who might be qualifying as a High King, Jarl Balgruuf, who he could have left in power, in which case Jarl Balgruuf might have been some competition to him in the mood, because as you said before, Jarl Balgruuf didn't have to be removed. He didn't really care about who would be in power, but he would be a threat to Ulfric, because we know that they've basically been rivals for all their lives. I don't remember where it was stated, but it said that as children they were already rivals, and as grown-ups they were basically the reason for they were the role models for young Nords to look up to, where Ulfric stood there for the Stormcloaks. But Jarl Balgruuf really swayed a lot of people to the Imperial side when he chose sides, because he was also a role model. So, well, yeah, it's not all black and white. He isn't a complete power-hungry tyrant, but it's all very convenient, and in the end, he is just the other side of the coin, and it isn't necessarily someone picked by us who will be a High King. It will be someone picked by Ulfric.
I believe I get to that point somewhere in these notes. I don't know.
Sure thing.
It's a big paragraph, but I would like to bring up one thing. Is that the High Queen? Well, she's not High Queen, but she would be Torig's wife. I don't know her name. I forget. But Torig's wife. That's what I'm gonna call her. If Ulfric truly wanted to just completely take it, then he would have had her killed after the Battle of Solitude, or at least took her off the throne of Solitude, which he didn't. And that would be probably, if besides Bolgraf, the biggest competition he'd have, because, you know, Torig, and then Torig's wife, you know, if you think after Torig died, his wife would become it. But that's not it, and he didn't take her off the throne. So he's really leaving it up to Moot, and I believe I get to his speech at Battle of Solitude, but I'd like to continue going down my notes, because I believe those will be the best direction for me. So when asking Ulfric, why are you fighting this war? He says, because we are done bleeding for an empire who won't bleed for us. Untold numbers of Nords died defending the empire against the Dominion, and for what? Skyrim being sold to the Thalmor so the Emperor can keep his throne? We're fighting because our own Jarls, once strong, wise men, have become fearful and blind to their people's suffering. We're fighting because Skyrim needs heroes, and there's no one else but us. And then, I believe I touched on this, is that the people of East March, after Ulfric's father's death, were angry, calling out for justice, for war, and they sat out Ulfric on the throne. In conclusion, the people chose Ulfric. And then while giving his speech in Whiterun, Galmor says, what we do today is for our country, for all true Nords of Skyrim. Not just Ulfric, but all true Nords of Skyrim. And then this is where I get to the Battle of Solitude speech. Ulfric says, but it is you, and speaking to the Stormcloak soldiers, and it says, but it is you who are the true heroes. It was you who fought a dying empire who sunk its claws into our land, trying to drag us down with it. It was you who fought the Thalmor and their puppets who would have us deny our gods and our heritage. It was you who fought your kin who didn't understand our cause, who weren't willing to pay the price for our freedom. But more than that, it was you who fought for Skyrim, for our right to fight our own battles, to return to our glory and traditions, to determine our own future. And it's for these reasons that I cannot accept the mantle of High King. Not until the Moot declares that title should I adorn it on my should I adorn my shoulders will I accept it. Which kind of touches back on the point that I said earlier, that he could have just took the throne right then and there, and it would have been okay. Stormcloaks, they own Skyrim. The Skyrim is independent now, but he leaves it up to the Moot to decide. And then it could, of course, go back to your saying that, well, he set it up to where he's obviously going to get chosen by the Moot, which, I mean, I can't really deny. They were either Stormcloak sympathizers or supporters, and honestly, if you're going to fight a war for independence, he wouldn't want to put pro-Imperials on the throne. It's just not a smart idea. But I don't think that completely says he's a tyrant. It's just, you know, if you want Skyrim's independence, put people who want an independent Skyrim on the throne. So, yeah.
Let's start with your first argument, which said that he could have removed Elisif but didn't. Now, that's an interesting thing, because you say that Elisif would have been his biggest competition next to Jarl Balgruuf, but would she have been? Because according to tradition, yeah, of course, she, as the wife of the king, she would become the queen. But considering that the whole matter of tradition and the way things used to be, or at least in the sense that the queen becomes the king after Torrik, I mean that whole tradition is shattered by Ulfric and is shattered during the Civil War. So in the end, what Ulfric would want is probably legitimacy, and Elisif isn't really a threat. I mean, everybody around herself, and even the people of her own hold, see her as incompetent, and the rest of the Jarls probably don't think too much of her either. So in terms of votes that she would get at any moot with Jarls, even if it's a Stormcloak controlled, even if it's an Imperial controlled moot, I'm not sure how many votes she would get. I mean, it would be far more logical for someone like Balgruf to become High King after the Imperials win, simply because he chose the side of the Imperials and he actually rallies Nords to his cause, and his leadership, which seems far more legitimate to many traditional Nords than Elisif, and might maybe even be acceptable to some Stormcloaks who have then lost. His leadership would actually make a difference and would be more than just a placeholder like Elisif's. Now, the second thing where you said that Ulfric, that the people of Skyrim want Ulfric to be High King, you basically touched on Eastmarch, Jesus, there. Eastmarch is not the entirety of Skyrim. Like, we don't know the exact numbers of Stormcloak supporters anywhere. We don't know, because, and in the end, it doesn't really matter, because whichever side wins the Civil War, no matter whether there's a Stormcloak or Imperial majority or minority, the winner will get to pick the High King, and in either side it will just be the nobility picking the High King, not the people. I mean, in the Imperial ending it will of course be Imperial picked nobility, and in the Stormcloak side it will be Ulfric / Stormcloak picked nobility. So in the end, it doesn't truly matter what the people think or what the makeup of the population is, like objectively. Of course, it should probably matter, but that's a discussion for another day. Because then you touched on, he could have taken the throne there and then at the Siege of Solitude. But if you think about it, why would he? Because the moment he's taken Solitude, he knows he has it all. I mean, the Imperials, they're scattered, they're dead. Skyrim is basically already his de facto. Like, de facto means it's just his, it's just not officially yet. He can do in Skyrim whatever he wants, and if he just took the crown of Solitude right there and then, he would break with the tradition that he himself wants to uphold, or at least that he says that he wants to uphold with the Moot. So why would he just take the throne there when he can also just wait a couple of months until the Moot can gather, which is handpicked by him, so they will pick him either way. And in the meantime, his Stormcloaks control the entirety of Skyrim, so he's already the big power in Skyrim. Like, why would he want to break tradition and quickly become king if he can also just increase his legitimacy to the people by actually having a Moot pick him? Because in the end, in terms of the power he will have, it doesn't really matter, because he knows that he's going to be king either way. And if he gets the throne there and then, he will have more problems than if he would have a Moot choose him, because a Moot would also give off the air of legitimacy to Imperial support as well. If he would take the throne there and there, then the Imperials would say, haha, so you're just a power-hungry tyrant. And he doesn't want to have that image. Like I already said, I'm not convinced that he fully is a power-hungry tyrant, but that's also what his rhetoric is for, the things that he says. Because just like in real life, you can just say things to win people for you and then just think something different. Because everything that he says has conveniently also a benefit to saying it. I mean, the thing about Falkreath we talked about earlier, but also saying, yeah, it was you who bled for us, when he already knows that he's going to become a High King. I mean, he can just say that to have more support among his people. Like, I'm not saying he's a liar at all, because I'm definitely, like, he's got some points, and he really wants Skyrim to be free. I believe that he wants that to be. I don't think he's just power hungry. But I also know that it's not black and white. It's not like he isn't power hungry or he is. No, it's probably somewhere in the middle. And all his rhetoric, all his speeches, they all serve a purpose. And just like not immediately grabbing the crown. I want to say the crown. He already has a jagged crown, but not immediately grabbing the throne also has a purpose to sort of give off the air of legitimacy when he already knows he's gonna become king. So why be like the piece of sand in his own sock and just annoy himself even more by having more people say that he isn't a true High King when he can also just wait a couple of months and become High King either way.
That's true. And with that, I've kind of ran out of notes, and I think I've touched on basically everything. All the arguments against them, and a couple of arguments for the Stormcloaks. Do you have any arguments for the Imperials? Because
I also went through most of my notes, and I have to say that many of the things that we said, I mean, they're completely down to interpretation. Like I said, there's no black or white. There's only what do you choose to believe. Like, how much do you choose to believe of his speeches, art, rhetoric to win people for him, and how much is truly what Ulfric wants. I mean, that's not something that we're given in the game. We're not shown what he does after the gameplay, because after the gameplay is after the game. So, I mean, many of the arguments that you made, just reflecting on the debate a bit, they're good arguments, and my arguments, in my opinion at least, they're also good, but whichever side is right really depends on the people's own interpretation of Skyrim and of what Ulfric says in the end, and like, do you think it's true or isn't it true? I mean, we won't know until Elder Scrolls 6. Maybe we won't even know then, because Bethesda will keep it vague. So, yeah, I would say you gave some great arguments. Like, let it be clear. Like, since I'm also through, and since the debate's basically run its course, and I really enjoyed the debate. But in the end, many of the arguments, at least in my opinion, really come down to, okay, what do you choose to believe, and how much black and how much white is there in the whole grey that is Skyrim, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think Bethesda obviously Bethesda did that on purpose, because you don't want to, when something like that, you don't really want to tilt one side more than the other. I think they did a pretty good job on balancing both sides to make it both have pros, both have cons, and you can argue either side, and I agree with you. I think it just depends on the person. Some people will say, oh, well, I played, for example, like, oh, well, I played Oblivion, I like the Empire, I'm going to go with Empire. Or it's like, oh, well, I'm going to go with Stormcloaks because I think they're right. Or just something like that. It's really just preference.
Yeah. I mean, even if you've played Oblivion and you like the Empire, you can also you can see Ulfric's point. I mean, I can also see Ulfric's point. I'm just not fully convinced by Ulfric as the person, and I'm not convinced that the cause in general is beneficial to Skyrim. But that's also something that's completely up for interpretation and completely up for what you think of the world and how you think the world is structured. And you're right that Bethesda did a pretty good job at making both sides equal, but that's what makes these kind of discussions, at least in my opinion, so interesting, because you're very convinced on Ulfric's side and I'm very convinced on the Empire side. I mean, neither of us, I think, we're going into this hoping to convince the other, but at least we've gotten a lot of in my opinion, very good arguments out there, and I think it was probably a pretty interesting conversation to follow, and I personally had a very fun time.
Yeah.
Right.
Very interesting. This is my first time doing something like that, so thanks for having me on. I don't know if I said that or not, but thank you for having me on. Yeah.
It was my pleasure, and there's also people in the Discord chat who you already saw, who wanted to know whether you had a channel. So for the people who are watching this on YouTube, his channel is in the description and in the comment section above or below. I mean, what kind of things do you do on your channel? What kind of things are you planning to do on your channel? Just for the people who are still watching at this point. Like, why would they come over? Because some people found you very interesting to listen to, and if they wanted to listen to you more, I mean, plug yourself.
Alright, well, besides, sadly, I don't really do too much Elder Scrolls content on my channel. I usually do just like playthroughs of games. I just talk over while I'm playing games. I do have a quote-unquote podcast. It's not really, it's just me talking about a topic, which is actually I think more than half of the topics have been about Elder Scrolls. So if you like to listen to me for some reason, then the podcast is pretty cool. I haven't done it in a while. I was actually gonna. I don't know. I haven't brought a guest on anytime. I don't know if I was gonna, but I do that. And then I play some just games. I have like 2 playthroughs and then one that's not set to be a playthrough. I have a Skyrim with mods video coming out, so that's really about it. I don't know. I just kind of try to entertain as much as I can, and yeah.
All right, I'd say, well, if you like what you heard, or if you like what he just said, I'd say visit his channel. And yeah, I want to thank everybody who was here as the audience for listening to our rambling on. And I want to thank everybody on YouTube who've made it this far, because we've gone on for like an hour, I think. I want to thank everybody who came this far to, that you've endured. I hope that YouTube didn't place too many advertisements on this whole thing. At least I'm doing it manually now to make sure that it's not too disruptive. I got very much feedback on the first lore debate that there were a lot of advertisements in it. That's because I allowed YouTube to place them for me. Which I usually do with videos, and then usually it's just one advertisement in the video. But apparently there was like one every 5 minutes, so I hope that's not the case. If so, please spam me in the comments, because if it's that, then I need to adjust it again. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will see you all in the next lore video. Bye bye.